Jessica Davis, and I'm here to talk a little bit about how you might go about starting a disability justice team in your congregation or other community entity. Because disability is something that for so much of our history as a culture has been treated with shame and been treated as something to be hidden, most folks who aren't disabled don't know much about disability. In fact, many people who are disabled don't know much about disability. I myself didn't until just a few years ago when I really made a commitment to be educating myself. So there's a lot of background work that I suggest that congregations do before they start their team. There's a lot of prep that has to happen. First things first, it's really important to just sort of learn the basics of disability in the US, in the world, and then in your community. A lot of folks don't know that according to the official definitions, 1 in 5 people in the US is disabled. If you include people with temporary disabilities, for example, a broken leg, it actually goes up to 1 in 4. So disabled people are everywhere. We are everywhere. We're in your church, we're at your school, we're at your work. You may in fact be a disabled person and not even have been taught that that's something that could apply to you. So disability really is anything that's happening in your body that the world around you has decided is not okay, and we're going to make it difficult for you to participate in the world because of this thing that's happening in your body. And so the definition of disability is much broader than a lot of people think. I think it's common to get stuck in, oh, well, the US government has a definition for what it means to be disabled enough to receive disability benefits. And we tend to assume that that's what disability is, but that's not actually what disability is. And I think it's also really important to know that disability is not something that is wrong with a person. Disability is something that's wrong with society that has told this person, you aren't welcome here. Other things to know about disability is the ways in which it interacts with things like race and gender and sexuality. People of color are much more likely to be disabled because of lack of access to healthcare and nutrition, but then they're also much less likely to be given disability services. The same is true of queer folks in our society, so that's something that's always going to play a part in discussions around disability. Another really important thing that churches will need to get clear on before they start their disability action team is the very unfortunate history that churches have in, frankly, being very unkind to disabled people. Beginning in the Middle Ages, there was really a push in the church to figure out, okay, why is this person disabled? And the answer was always that they were a sinner or that their families were a sinner. This certainly didn't start in the Middle Ages. We have examples of it happening in the Bible, and Jesus is pretty clear, no, that's not how it works. But in the Middle Ages, there was really sort of an explosion of this type of thinking. And it really informed a lot of the way the church constructed its liturgy. It's the way we do prayers. It's just sort of everywhere. So really be looking at the things you do on a day-to-day basis. Look at the language in your liturgy. Is it full of, I stand up for XYZ? Well, there are people who can't stand. There are lots of people in the world who can't stand. And often that language lands in ways to them that says, oh, well, this thing isn't for me. Another thing that it's really, really important to know, and it's painful to talk about, is the way in which the church participated in the AIDS crisis. Lots of people are aware that churches are exempt from following the Americans with Disabilities Act. And it's common to assume that's because, churches probably couldn't afford to make the accommodations that the law requires. That's actually not the case. There are lots of organizations and businesses and places that can't afford it, and the law is the law, and they're told, hey, you have X amount of time to get it together. You need to welcome disabled people, and that's how it is. The reason that the church was not told that was because powerful Christian organizations, really across every denomination, fought very, very hard in the late 1980s to be exempt. And the reason they wanted to be exempt is that they wanted to keep people with AIDS and HIV out of their churches. You can read transcripts of hearings. It's very, very painful. But the church made no attempt to even conceal that that's what they were doing. We wanted to discriminate against queer people, and this was a way that we could do it, and say, oh, well, it's against our beliefs to make accommodations for folks. And the Supreme Court agreed. And so churches are legally exempt from following the Americans with Disabilities Act. You won't be surprised to hear, I don't think that means that we are morally or theologically exempt. So, once you've sort of learned the history, a little bit about the history of disability and the raw data, the facts of disability in your community, it's going to be really important to identify what is our theology of disability? What do we believe as a community about disability? And so I invite you to really spend time in Scripture, reading passages that include disabled people. I invite you to read the writings of disabled theologians, to talk to disabled people in your community, in your congregation. What do you believe? What do they believe? And then you can start looking at, okay, how does what we live and what we do not line up with what we believe? So if we believe that all people are welcome to attend our services, do you have to get up steps to get into your sanctuary? If you can't access the sanctuary, you can't attend worship. That involves things like, are the lights really dim in your sanctuary? I often, make the joke of, having to hold my sermon up to my face because I can't see it. But it really isn't a joke. As someone who is, pretty dramatically visually impaired, it affects everything I do. And there are churches where I've said, hey, these lights are so dim, I can't see anything. Is there any chance that you could raise them? And the answer has been absolutely not. We like it dark in here. Figure it out. I am used to that. I've been preaching a very long time. I, have cultivated the ability to preach off the top of my head. So it's not such a big deal these days, but it still doesn't make you feel great. When someone says, no, our ambiance is more important than you being able to do your job. So things like that come up a lot. Things that might be harder to see are things like the pacing of meetings. So as someone with both ADD and autism, pacing of meetings is sometimes a challenge for me. If we're talking about the same topic for an hour and a half, you're going to lose me at some point. You're going to lose a lot of people at some point. And the idea is not that you know everything about every disability. The idea is thinking from a place that says, oh, because a church involves lots of people, there's going to be lots of needs in this space. And so we probably should ask people, hey, what do you need? And it also is going to involve educating yourself in common disabilities. So for example, it's common for people to be visually impaired. So that's something that you should be thinking about all the time. It's common to have people who have mental illnesses, as I do myself. It's common to have neurodivergent people, as I am myself. I will note not all neurodivergent people view it as a disability. Some view it as a strength. I am someone who I do call it a disability simply because the world has said it's not okay to be neurodivergent. And the world has said the way you are doesn't work for us and we don't want you here. So I do view it in a disability in that sense, but I think it's important to allow people, to define disability or not for themselves. But so, yeah, go through that process of taking a look at what you believe and how what you do is different than what you believe. Talk to disabled people about what they experience and what they need. And there will be things you can implement right away. There will be things that take more time. But it's just really important to be coming from a place of understanding that if we say that all are welcome, if we say we believe that all people were created in the image of God, that we don't attach a but to that. That we don't tell people, oh yes, you were created in the image of God and who you are is perfect and who you are is holy. However, if your legs don't work like mine, you cannot come to my church. However, if your brain doesn't work like mine, and you might make noise during the service, you can't come to my church. So it really involves a shift in how we think, it involves a shift in how we believe, and it involves really sort of radical trust that disabled people know what helps them, disabled people know what welcomes them, and all we need to do is ask them and they can tell us that. I do want to make a special note about the use of technology. So, as I said, churches are exempt from the ADA, and so lots of people who are disabled, particularly people with mental illness and people who have physical disabilities in ways that, make steps not a possibility, don't go to church. But these folks have been having church on their own using technology for a very long time. Disabled folks tend to be great at technology. And so, when the pandemic started and churches started moving to using Zoom or using other technologies, much of that technology was developed by disabled people. And often they didn't get paid for it. Often they didn't get acknowledged for creating it. And then they found that as things shifted in the pandemic, these churches that were so excited to use this technology now suddenly said, we're going back to in-person worship. We don't need it. And so they found themselves excluded once again. And so I would really just encourage you, if you at all have the ability to make the things you do, not just worship, but important meetings, the things that you do that are important, make sure that disabled people can access them, whether that is in person or online. I am someone who, though I'm a leader in the church, I'm profoundly immunocompromised. And so I did not set foot in a church for 2 years. All of my work went online. And I did find that more and more churches would say, oh, well, we don't need online worship anymore. We're done with that. And so my participation in these churches had to be done. And so I would just really encourage you, the technology exists. It's not as hard as you think. There are disabled people you can hire that will help you navigate the technology. I'm happy to make referrals if you need. There are disability consultants that will work with your congregation and come in and just sort of take a bird's eye view and help you identify problems that you might not have noticed. And disabled people are really great at thinking around corners and coming up with really surprising solutions. So I really invite you to consult with disabled people as much as possible. You probably have a disability rights organization that meets near you. ADAPT is a national one that has chapters all over the country. So you may have a chapter of ADAPT. If not, you probably have some organization. So reach out to them, pick their brains as much as you can, and always just be trusting that disabled people know what they need, and that God is empowering all of us in community to find a way forward together. Thank you so much for listening, and please feel free to contact me at any time if you have any questions or want to discuss further. Thank you.